Hot off the presses, our decision desk has just made a call in Ohio on issue 1, and we project that it will pass. Yes, on issue 1 will pass, putting the right to abortion in the state constitution in Ohio, with the provision that restrictions can be applied after the point of fetal viability, about 22, 24 weeks. But
that's right, Aaron. CNN can now make a projection in a marquee race this evening. CNN is projecting that Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, a Democrat, has been reelected. This is a very significant win for Democrats.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to a Bulwark election off your election night live stream. So you're stuck with me and Bill Kristol. I am coming at you live from a beautiful hotel room here in Las Vegas because I spent the day with Carrie Lake and Steve Bannon. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But at first, Bill, where are you? You in Virginia?
Some of us are just, sitting around our houses, living our modest lives. Which super fancy? I'm scared to even ask. Vegas hotel you're at?
Is
that one of the king suites that the huge gamblers get, with the 4-room, 7-room suite or something?
I lost 200 busies on the craps table, so I'm not in a king suite. We have tonight. We'll get to the big win for Andy Beshear in Kentucky for the Democrats. We'll get to the abortion referendum in Ohio, another win for the Democratic side, if you will, in Ohio, and legalizing marijuana, legalizing gelato, we're calling that these days, in Ohio. So there's something there. But Bill, you're in Virginia, so the closest, I wouldn't really call Virginia a bellwether, but the closest of the states that we had elections in tonight. The basically, just to set the table here. The Democrats controlled one chamber. The Republicans controlled the other chamber. Glenn Youngkin was running, basically, I think staking his political viability, really. Explicitly, he was saying this on, the hope that Virginia would give him both houses of the legislature and allow them to pass a lot of his legislative agenda, including on abortion, which he campaigned on. It wasn't just the Democrats that he campaigned on. And so we're here tonight, and it looks like the Senate has already been called for the Democrats and the House up in the air. You've been following this more closely than I have, though, so give us the Virginia lay of the land.
No, it's been an exciting night in Virginia. It's a little hard to follow each of these House districts and Senate districts, but and they've all been reapportioned, so they're incumbents against incumbents. You don't have a kind of a good. It's more up in the air than usual because the districts are new. But it looks Democrats have done well. It looks they certainly have they've held the Senate. I think they're going to win the House. It's very, very close. It's hard to tell where the outstanding vote is. Is it early vote or is it election day vote? The usual things that Dave Wasserman and everyone, and let's go on about, and quite intelligently and interestingly. But abortion was a very big issue here. I mean, I think just to pick up on your other point, I mean, when you really think about what happened, Ohio, big victory, a red state, big victory for the constitutional amendment legalizing, ensuring a right to abortion. It's kind of a big deal, right? I mean, striking. Not so easy to get a constitutional amendment passed. Virginia, abortion was all over the airwaves here. Really a huge amount of money spent on both sides. And Youngkin raised it, and probably foolishly, I think yesterday, gave an interview to Fox, I think, where he stressed that he was not backing away. He was going to have 15-week restrictions on abortion, not 6-week or anything like that. But still, it put the issue front and center one last time here. And Beasley in Kentucky, a very red state, actually, abortion was more prominent there than I had realized.
You're dating yourself. Beasley is the South Carolina governor. Beshear. We're just
Beshear,
you're talking about your southern
Democrats,
but Beshear, go ahead.
No, you covered that. Well, you should talk about that more. But even there, I mean, he was pro-choice and he was unabashed about it, and he's defended it in Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken. And that was a little more of an issue than I realized. So abortion rights really turns out to be a strong issue for the Democrats.
I think that the two, and I want to go a little deeper on Virginia, but the two overwhelming takeaways that I have for the night is one, that the abortion issue continues to be strong for Democrats. But the other one is that the Democratic coalition now is much more reliable in off-year elections. And I think that we've had a big reshuffling of the parties. We've written about that a lot at the Bulwark. We've talked about the Red Dog Democrats. There's been a change in the makeup of the parties, the types of voters who are attracted to each party. And for the longest time, Republicans had this advantage where their coalition was just more likely to turn out. In these off-year elections, Democrats were relying a lot on younger voters and voters that are maybe a little less reliable. A lot of the new voters are people, really, frankly, Bill, that have come into the Democratic coalition are conscientious. Your upper middle class, suburban mom and dad, they turn out to vote in these kinds of elections, and I think that harms Republicans. So Republicans do have this structural advantage still in the Senate, in the Electoral College, but in a weird way, while that kind of increase of working class voters has helped their structural advantage in the Senate and in the Electoral College, it has harmed their advantage in other way. It has cut both ways. And I think this is like really the big takeaway, because we've seen this now for Democrats in election after election, special election after midterm, and certainly Trump has something to do with it. Certainly abortion has something to do with it. But I do think that the rejiggering of the parties, coalitions, is also benefiting Democrats in these types of elections.
No, I think that's really true. I think if you just the sort of natural break now of the parties, the issues, some of which help Republicans, obviously crime, and others, the border, some of which help Democrats, abortion, particularly. One big question about abortion is, does it help as much in a federal race as it does in these state races? Here it really mattered in Virginia. The actual law that is going to be on the books next year in Virginia would have been different if Republicans had won the Senate and held the state house. We'll see what happens in the state house. So can you make, on a national election, can you convince people that the Senate and the president and the House are going to actually nationally ban abortion, or nationally prohibit states from banning abortion? I think it's less obvious that it's a federal issue for 2024, but certainly in these state races and maybe in federal races, the issue mix is not bad for Democrats, I would say. The coalition is not bad for Democrats. The candidates are not bad for Democrats. I think that was very striking here in Virginia. I didn't follow it as closely as some people did. My impression is the Democrats had good candidates in a lot of the key districts. Impressive people. Some of them cut against the grain. There were former prosecutors, sort of Spanberger-like, former CIA, some military, some of the Red Dog type Democrats you've been encouraging them to recruit. And then a lot of activists and progressives, some of whom were also good candidates. So I think in all those respects, and the Republicans are hurt by Trump ultimately, and by MAGA, I think. So even though Youngkin tries to put a nicer face on it. So I think one thing we'll learn, the natural break is not bad for Democrats. It's not hugely in their favor, but it's probably somewhat in their favor. That I think might be a lesson of, can't draw too many lessons in 3 or 4 states. But if you put this together with 2022, I think there's some reason to think that.
I do agree with that. I do think that the Democrats' candidate quality has been a little bit better. I will say that to speak that it's not just about candidate quality, no judgment here, but even to show that it's something a little bit more than that, is that even Susanna Gibson is a House delegate who famously was involved in a scandal about, where it leaked that she was doing sex camming online. It's a very modern scandal there in Virginia. Her race is close. A lot of Republicans were counting her out, counting that as a victory.
Well, her husband. I think it was with her husband, Tim. And I don't mean, here in Virginia, we're kind of hip. You guys out there in Vegas, you people, Tim, in New Orleans where you live, and in Vegas where you are now, you guys are a little uptight. But here in Virginia, we're cool with that,
Cam away, as far as I'm concerned. Everybody, you just cam with your loved ones tonight. But I'm just saying, Barry says stop kink shaming. I'm not kink shaming. Kink away. But I'm just saying, in the Richmond suburbs in Henrico County, you could see how maybe that might have been a concern. Turns out not to be. We do have a breaking news here. Ben Tribbett, who I respect a lot. He has a funny, his X handle is not Larry Sabato. He has a projection that with a victory in House District 65, it looks like, that best Republicans can now do is have a tie in the House. So that's Ben Tribbett's prediction. So again, so that would not just mean that the Democrats held the Senate, but gained in the House in Virginia. I want to go back to the candidate thing though, less tongue in cheek with Andy Beshear. Because this is something, and I know a lot of, and please send us your comments and questions. I'm kind of monitoring some of these. If anybody has comments or questions you want me to ask Bill, or for me, but both of us wish that Republicans put up candidates like Andy Beshear in blue states, right? Like, I would love for Larry Hogan, Phil Scott, Charlie Baker types to be the types that Republicans put up in blue states, and to be able to support them, and for them to be moderate candidates who are not Trumpists. I would love for that to happen. That's not happening. Those candidates are getting flushed out in Republican primaries. In the Democratic primaries, that's not always there. Obviously, there's some exceptions to this, but generally speaking, they've been more open to heterodox candidates like Beshear. And I think that is another lesson tonight. We have Brandon Presley, who I wrote about in Mississippi. That race, the numbers are still coming in. It's looking like Reeves is a favorite in that, but pretty close for Mississippi. The fact they haven't called it yet here at 10:30 in the East shows you that, again, that you can outperform the party fundamentals if you have a candidate that cuts against the grain. So Beshear, you mentioned he's pro-choice, so he didn't go full. It's not like a John Bell Edwards, my home state of Louisiana. John Bell Edwards is a pro-life Democrat that won. So he didn't even go that far on the cultural issues, but just by going away from the national party on some of the divisive stuff, demonstrating that you're responsive to concerns of working class voters, in particular, working class white voters, part of this MAGA coalition. That's pretty impressive that Andy Beshear could pull that off.
And Presley, running against the incumbent Republican, had a scandal tarred. But he probably is going to come within a couple of points, but he'll lose, I suppose. But that shows in Mississippi. I mean, that shows. You mentioned at a conference we were both at a couple of weeks ago. You made the case for nominating. Yeah. You mentioned you'd spoken with Presley, or were about to, I think, and you mentioned Beshear, and that can the Democrats please nominate people who are appropriate for these states and districts, and be a little more intentional and self-conscious about that. And I think that's been very much vindicated here, with the partial exception of that woman outside of Richmond.
I'm just saying, I don't want to pick on Susanna. Hey, I do want to ask you. I received some negative feedback about Bill. People have some concerns about you. You have some concerns because you have some concerns about Joe Biden and his strength as a candidate. So I'm interested in your thought. Obviously, a good night for Biden. Is this a good night for Biden, a bad night for the idea that there'd be another candidate? Or, do you want to trouble make and say, hey, this is a good night for Andy Beshear to decide that he wants to be the Dem nominee?
That occurred to me, but I suppose I could say that, but it would just be troublemaking. I don't think he's quite ready to run. Having just gotten reelected. I mean, I think Biden will get some credit for it, and he should. He stayed out of most of these states, and I don't say that in a snarky way. I mean, I think he was smart to stay out, and I give him credit for not butting in, so to speak. Youngkin, thought he could really help in Virginia, and ended up maybe making it too much about him and about one or two issues he was particularly associated with, especially abortion. So Biden stayed out. But which way does it come? I mean, so there'll be a little bit of a bump. There was a bigger one after 2022. The Democrats did well with Biden. But what is the real lesson? I mean, if one can be just honest, is the lesson for me is that the current Democratic Party is pretty good shape. Is Biden as strong as the party? And in fact, in the CNN poll that came out a few hours ago, it was kind of interesting. The congressional generic ballot was +1 Republican. Trump was up 4 over Biden. In other words, it's a little difference. It probably, it's within margin of error kind of thing. But it suggests to me that I don't know. I mean, it's really an honest question. Would the Democrats be better with the Whitmer-Beshear ticket next year, or with Biden as the presidential candidate?
Well, yeah. I mean,
I know we don't need to go down this.
Snap our fingers.
We're not going to get the Whitmer-Beshear ticket. I'm going to say there's some truth to that, but on the other hand, then we'll have the same conversation we've had many times.
Instead of having that same conversation, I noticed that the Biden-Harris Threads feed. I'm over on Threads now. I noticed that they had put out a fact that I think does speak a little. Again, it doesn't, obviate all of Biden's problems, but it's noteworthy that in Kentucky, Republicans spent $30 million trying to nationalize that race and using Biden as a boogeyman. And we've seen that work effectively in the past. Obama was used as a boogeyman effectively at times. Pelosi, Bush, Trump, obviously, is being used continues to be used as a boogeyman effectively. Haven't seen that work with Joe Biden. Now, that doesn't mean that he is strong per se, but like the Biden is a boogie, like what you hear on some of these podcasts, right? Or from some of these media pundits is that like Biden is so unpopular. He's in the tank. Everybody hates Joe Biden. And it's like, if that was true, then the Biden scaremongering ads would work.
I think that's a very fair point. And I agree with the Biden-Harris people about that. Bidenism is not a problem. And so saying this guy agrees with Joe Biden isn't a big problem, because most people think Biden is a reasonably moderate Democrat, and they're unhappy about inflation and all that, but that doesn't spill over to Andy Beshear, presumably. it's a very different question. I will not litigate this thing for too long, but I will just say it's a very different question to actually say that Biden at age 82 should be president for the next 4 years. Bidenism is more popular than Biden. I guess that's my shorthand defense of my concern about Biden as a candidate.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. One other thing that I've seen several people comment on. I think we should both give our opinion on this, but once again, I guess Dems didn't really outdo the polls tonight per se, because Beshear was winning in the polls or something. But do these results make you feel like maybe some of these national polls like don't really reflect what is happening in practice, especially when you consider it in context of what we saw last November? Or maybe then, is there could it be such that I do think for a while there was a period of time where Trump voters weren't answering these polls. There was a period of time where Trump himself, really more than Trump candidates, were being underpolled. Like there was a decent proof of that. Are we now seeing potentially proof of the other side, or do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the actual state level polls will turn out to have been reasonably accurate in the states. Pennsylvania, maybe the Supreme Court justice, the Democrat, is doing a little better than they thought in the polls, but I think that was likely to go that way too. So I think you might be right, though, that the Democratic voters are now sort of higher propensity voters in some of these off-year elections. Trump brings an awful lot of low propensity voters to the polls. They're captured in these registered voter polls like this New York Times, Siena, or CNN. Maybe it's a little misleading because maybe they won't all vote, or maybe once they get educated, once they really start paying attention, they'll realize, maybe Trump's a bridge too far. So I know I've never been fatalistic. I think it's a mistake to mistake these polls as too much. It's a snapshot and a blurry snapshot of the present. And it's fair enough to say that it doesn't. We shouldn't be driven too much by them. If there's a lot of them, and if they're consistent, and if they're consistent with repeated polling. In the case of Biden, honestly, I mean, the job approval number, that's a real thing. And I don't see that that's susceptible to these kinds of mistakes, really. It may just be that people are in a surly mood, though, and they'll still vote for the incumbent. That's got to be the bet. But it's been very consistent over all this time. So I don't know. What do you think? I mean,
I don't think that this is. I do think that there have been times where polls have been systemically wrong because, for example, I think that in certain states there's a lot of evidence for this. Spanish-speaking Hispanics were not answering polls, and in states where there are a lot of those, like Nevada, Democrats were doing better than the polls because they weren't captured. And I think that there was a period of time where Trump voters were so whatever that they weren't answering. I think the psyche of the Trump voter has gone from I'm really proud to be for Trump to I'm not going to say I'm for Trump to like now like screw you guys, I'm going to answer these polls and tell you you're an asshole liberal from the East Coast and that I'm for Trump, right? And so I think there may have been something there in the psyche of Trump voters that there was a period where they were underpolled. I don't think that it's true here. I do think this is more about two things. One, what I started with, the Democratic coalition being more higher propensity to turn out, and that when that's a marginal thing, that's hard to test, right? Like, it's hard to judge in a poll somebody's propensity to vote. Really, they ask that question, but it's a little bit harder to game out, whether people are being honest about that. The other thing is, I think that there is a small percentage of people that just and maybe it's different people for each issue, but on abortion and on whatever you want to call it, democracy, radicalization, that like they really aren't for Democrats, and they say in polls that they're not because they don't like Joe Biden, but at the end of the day they're coming back around, and they're just like I'm being left with no other option. Like if you're going to ban abortion at 6 weeks and you're going to make this a Trump autocracy, like I guess I'm going to vote for Andy Beshear. And I think this is a marginal voter. I think that is making a difference. And when I was with Bannon earlier today, I was like, look, eventually, I don't want to have be Pollyanna and have happy talk. Like the math, the odds are at some point you get lucky and win an election because of a confluence of events. But boy, we have a really long pattern right now of Republicans screwing the pooch. Like basically since Youngkin's last election, right. Like the Republicans are just on a losing streak in all of these places where they're not able to get over the hump. And I think that there's that confluence of candidate quality, abortion, and democracy that's working in Democrats' favor. Not as much as I wish it was, frankly, but like enough that it would be mistaken to not notice. It doesn't mean that we should be all chill and think that whatever.
I totally agree with that. I mean, look, what's the biggest issue that's hurting Biden in all the polls, though, nationally? the economy, inflation, and fairly, unfairly. Jonathan Last, it's terrible. People don't understand, whatever. But that's clearly what people say. I don't think that's an issue in most of these state level elections because people do not think that the state legislator from outside Richmond or even that Governor Beshear has much to do with the national economy or with inflation, certainly. So could these other issues, could the Democrats, could Biden fight to something closer to a draw on the economy? Could he explain his policies better? Maybe inflation subsides some. And then you get some of these other issues coming in a bigger way. I think the Democratic Party as a whole is naturally, I'm making this up, 53% of the country or something like that, and the Republicans are 46. I mean, I think there is an advantage now against the MAGA Republican Party for a sane Democratic Party. It's just that if Biden gets blamed for inflation and for other things because people are so unhappy about the way the country's going, and he's the incumbent president, and is kind of old, that could be, he could underperform by 2 or 3 points. But that's why I do think the generic Democrat wins nationally as well as in these states. But we should not end on a down note. And
no, we should. Well, I have
and
one more
I,
down, I have one
it's
more
an
down
upbeat
thing.
moment. I mean, it's good for I think it's good for the country what happened tonight.
It is. It looks like one more downer note. It does look like Tate Reeves is going to go ahead and win in Mississippi, according to Wasserman, and the turnout there across the board. I think this is another long-term thing. One area where the Democrats, I think that in our circles, Stacey Abrams gets mocked a lot. I think sometimes rightly because of what she said about election fraud. But the Georgia had this secret sauce going where Democrats, the combo of turnout and registration with Black voters and young voters that she spearheaded with the candidates, that were speaking more to the suburban Atlanta suburbs, like those two things working together worked. Presley didn't really get that tonight. And I do think that it's interesting. Anyway, we can have a longer discussion about Mississippi.
Just one footnote to that, slightly, more in the weeds kind of thing. The Democratic Party professionals, the people who are the state chairs and the executive directors of the parties at this point, are pretty good in a lot of these big states, I think. In Wisconsin, one has the sense they know what they're doing. In Georgia, I think here in Virginia, incidentally, where they've done well in Youngkin era in opposing him, but not looking too strident and doing so. In Pennsylvania, clearly, where they're at Wisconsin, where they won those, Michigan, where Whitmer swept everything. The Republicans are paying some price for the fact that half their county chairs at this point are MAGA lunatics. And are not capable to organize anything and don't know how to go after swing voters and just think if they have scream and yell a lot when Michael Flynn shows up, that that's really a campaign strategy. So I think the Democrats are a sort of a healthier party, if you want to put it that way, operationally than the Republicans.
I totally agree with that. And I think that unfortunately for Presley, that's tough to do in 50 states, right? And I think that, they need a Ben Winkler in all these states. Shout out to our pal in Wisconsin. Okay. We have a lot more to talk about. We are going to start doing these on Tuesdays, not at 10:30 every night, but, on Tuesdays, just to have a little straight politics chat, analyze the polls, look at the crosstabs, feel our feelings, talk about the vibes. And so, go ahead and subscribe there to the Bulwark YouTube feed. Come hang out with me and Bill. Maybe we'll bring in some other people who are, smarter than us sometimes in specific areas. I know that's hard to believe. And sign up for the Bulwark newsletters if you haven't, to keep up to date on these and all the other great offerings we have. Bill, do you have any final thoughts or tidings for the viewers?
Thank you all for joining us here tonight. And Tim, we'll be back in a week. I look forward to it.
See you next week. Peace.